Some women were taught that obedience kept them alive. Cordelia Bloodmoon had learned the sharper truth. Obedience only kept her useful. Survival came from choosing which humiliation she could endure in public and which chains she could refuse in private. For 5 winter moons she had stood barefoot in the sacred stone circle, lifted her chin while the whole pack watched, and declined Alpha King Wulfric Stoneheart's mate ceremony. Each refusal bought 1 more year of anonymity, 1 more year before anyone looked too closely at the blood she carried. On the 6th year, winter returned with missing children, and secrecy stopped being protection. The first child came back just before dawn, left shivering on the lower quarter chapel steps beneath a borrowed blanket that smelled of tar and kennel smoke. He was 9, too exhausted to cry, with soot under his nails and a neat burn on his inner forearm shaped like a hooked crescent crossed by 3 bars. Cordelia knelt in the thin blue light, fingers hovering above the mark before she touched it, and felt the old panic rise from her gut to her throat. Shadowfang iron. Not a rumor. Not old war metal traded in back alleys. Fresh, deliberate, and placed where everyone could see once sleeves were rolled back. By midday she had 3 pieces of proof wrapped in linen, a charcoal rubbing of the brand, iron residue scraped from the blister edge with a bone spoon, and a button stamped with the Shadowfang wolfhead crest she had found sewn into the returned child's blanket seam. Her hands shook as she tucked the bundle inside her bodice. The old servant cuffs hidden beneath her sleeves bit into scar tissue each time she moved. She had never removed them completely. The skin had grown around memory even where metal no longer touched. In a corridor mirror she caught her reflection and saw what the palace preferred her to be. Useful, quiet, easy to dismiss. She was still breathing hard when she entered the council hall. Smoke from cedar braziers braided with cold moonstone air. 12 elders sat in a crescent winter furs layered over rank chains, and behind them stood spectators who had come for governance, but stayed for spectacle. Cordelia advanced to the center slab and placed the linen bundle down with both palms flat. "Children are being taken from the lower quarters," she said. "One returned this morning, branded with Shadowfang iron. I am asking for immediate ward searches and gate records from the last 3 nights." Council Elder Mirren did not look at the evidence. "You are asking as what exactly?" The question landed like a slap everyone pretended not to hear. Cordelia answered anyway. "As a pack member who found a child marked like freight." A short laugh came from the back, polished and sympathetic in all the wrong ways. Drake Shadowfang stepped forward before the herald could announce him, dark cloak trailing, grief arranged neatly across his face. He bowed to the council with practiced restraint, then turned toward Cordelia as if he were pained to contradict her. "My cousin has endured much," he said softly. "Trauma can make patterns where none exist. This mark is forge work. Anyone with a brazier and malice could imitate our seal." The hall shifted. Not loudly. A rustle of approval, suspicion redistributing itself toward the easiest target. Cordelia untied the linen with stiff fingers, displayed the rubbing and residue, and set the stamped button on the stone so it clicked. "Your household crest was in the blanket seam." Drake's eyes cooled. "A planted token proves only intent to accuse." "She is right," said Matron Ilva from the lower benches, voice strained. 2 more children are still missing." Elder Garrick slammed his staff once. "Enough. We will not ignite panic over servant quarter gossip." Servant quarter. Not lower quarter families. Not names. Geography as erasure. Then Mirren pronounced it, each word heavy with legal calm. "Given the severity of accusation against a high house, the council invokes tribunal by moonrise. Cordelia Bloodmoon will be held for false witness risk. If she cannot prove intent and source, her pack name will be stripped. In light of repeated refusals of the royal mate right, ceremonial submission may be required to secure stability." The room inhaled as one body. Cordelia felt heat flood her face, then drain. They had folded two blades into one sentence: dishonor and coercion. Wulfric stood along the upper rail, not on the dais, broad-shouldered in black and silver with no crown on his head and command in every still line of him. For 5 years she had measured herself against his silence in the stone circle, against the strange patience in his gaze when she declined him before the pack. He did not speak now. His jaw tightened once. That was all. Guards approached from either side. One reached for her elbow with fingers that pressed exactly where her old cuff scars lay. "Do not touch me there," she said. He tightened his grip. By the second bell after noon, they had confined her in the east antechamber used for witness holds, a room with no latch on the inside and one slit window opening toward the kitchens. A jug of water. A blanket that smelled of lye. No fire. Her evidence remained on the small table, because procedure required presented proof stay with the accused until tribunal call. Procedure also meant no advocate unless invited by council vote. No one had invited one. She sat on the floor with knees drawn up, sleeves pushed back, staring at the pale ridges circling both wrists. I kept declining because I thought one day of public shame was cheaper than a lifetime of captivity. I can survive mockery. I can survive being called cold, barren, ungrateful, proud. I cannot survive a bond built on blackmail, cannot stand in a ceremony while Drake's people move children through cellar doors and call it law. If I lose tonight, they will strip my name first, then my choices. If I submit, they will dress compulsion as duty and ask me to thank them for mercy. If I break now, every girl in the lower corridors will learn the lesson I was sold to teach. Keep your head down, endure, disappear. I am so tired. I am so angry. I am not done. Footsteps paused beyond the door at dusk. 2 voices, low and certain, carried through old wood. "She goes before moonrise," one guard muttered. "Shadowfang requested transfer afterward." "Transfer where?" "Ritual vault level. Says the king signed provisional containment." A second voice gave a humorless snort. "King signs nothing he cannot watch." "Then why move the ring and chains up from the crypt?" Silence. Then, quieter. "Because this is not a trial." Cordelia stood too fast, dizziness tilting the room. Ring and chains. The words slid into place against scraps she had ignored for years. Shipments logged as altar repair, moonstone dust stolen from archives, Drake insisting on ceremony attendance even when she was officially only staff. The knot behind her ribs loosened into a hard, cold line of purpose. Tribunal was cover. Moonrise was a harvest. 3 days earlier, she had taught the lower quarter children to knot rope for winter laundry lines in the old scullery. She still had one length braided and hidden in the blanket hem from habit learned in service years. She pulled the rope free, tested it, then dragged the table beneath the window slit. The opening was narrow, stone edges rough, but she had been kept in tighter places before. She wrapped her wrists with torn blanket strips so the stone would not rip old scars open, wedged her shoulders through, and dropped into the exterior ash chute that fed behind the kitchens. The descent scraped skin from her palms and knocked breath from her lungs when she landed in cinders, but no alarm sounded. Kitchen noise covered everything: ladles striking iron, cooks shouting over steam, door hinges crying out in rhythm with wind. Cordelia crouched, black dust coating her dress, and moved through stacked coal bins toward the servants' passage. A scullion boy nearly collided with her, eyes wide. She caught his shoulders gently. "Find Matron Ilva. Tell her hide the missing lists, and move the children to chapel lofts in pairs. Say it now." He swallowed and nodded, then ran. She kept to shadowed corridors she knew better than any council map. Past the laundry vault. Past the old nursery sealed after fever season. Past the carved lintel where someone had scratched a wolf and moon with a kitchen knife years ago, a private promise that even trapped things had teeth. At the west postern she found the bolt half frozen and worked it open with both hands, breath burning in her chest. Night struck cold against her face, full of pine resin and snow light, and distant from the upper terraces came the first call for moonrise assembly. Behind her, bells began to ring. One long, two short, the signal for escaped custody. Cordelia pulled her hood low, pressed the linen evidence against her heartbeat, and ran into the dark toward the ancient stone circle where they meant to judge her, because fleeing the palace was no longer enough. If she wanted any child to come home unbranded, she would have to walk back into the center of the trap and break it in front of everyone. Snow crust snapped under Cordelia's boots as she cut across the herb terraces and into the royal cedar grove, the oldest ground in Stoneheart Keep, and the one stretch of land nobody crossed without sanction from the Alpha King. The alarm bells continued behind her, one long and two short, folding into the wind like iron striking bone. She kept running anyway. Cold air rasped down her throat. Her palms stung where the ash shoot had flayed skin away. Beneath torn blanket strips, the cuff scars around her wrists throbbed with each heartbeat, a pulse that felt less like pain now and more like warning. The grove rose in black columns around her, trunks plated with frost, moonlight spilling in narrow white bars between branches. Ahead, rune lanterns burned along the path to the ancient stone circle, silver flames bent low by wind. She could hear voices already gathering there, layered and restless, the sound of a crowd preparing to witness punishment and call it order. No one had expected her to arrive under her own power. That gave her one breath of advantage, maybe two. A pair of royal sentries dropped from the watch ridge and landed in front of her with practiced precision, fur-lined cloaks snapping behind them. Both wore Stoneheart sigils over leather armor, and both had that preternatural stillness of wolves riding just beneath skin. One lifted a hand, not to strike, but to halt. "Custody breach is active," he said. "Stop where you stand." Cordelia lifted her chin, breathing hard. "Then escort me to tribunal. Now." The second sentry's gaze flicked to the bundle clutched against her chest, then to the blood spotting her wraps. "You were ordered held until moonrise." "It is moonrise." Her voice came out rough but steady. And Drake Shadowfang moved ritual hardware from the crypt. "If I disappear below this keep, your king will inherit a corpse and a lie." The first sentry studied her for one long second, nostrils flaring at scent and fear and truth, all mixed together. Then he gave a short nod to his partner. "Flank her. We take her through King's Passage." They moved fast through the cedar gate and down a narrow corridor cut into old stone, the walls etched with moon prayers half eroded by centuries of hands. Torches hissed in iron brackets. From somewhere below, Cordelia heard the faint drag of metal across rock, heavy links being hauled into place. Chains. Not metaphor, not paranoia. Real. By the time they emerged into the tribunal antechamber, her legs were shaking. Her dress was streaked in ash and snowmelt, hair half fallen from its braid, the linen evidence bundle crushed damp in her grip. Council scribes stared. Courtiers turned openly to look. A cluster of lower quarter women near the back saw her and straightened like reeds in floodwater. Fear and stubborn hope crossing their faces at once. Matron Ilva stood among them, jaw set hard enough to crack teeth. She gave Cordelia one brief nod. Message delivered. Children moved. Relief hit so fast it almost buckled her knees. Then Drake stepped from the colonnade in ceremonial black, silver wolf head clasp bright at his throat, and offered her the same sorrowful expression he wore when he wanted the room to mistake cruelty for concern. "There you are," he said quietly. "Running from lawful custody deepens guilt, cousin." "You taught me what cages are for," she answered. "Tonight I learned where you keep yours." His mouth curved without warmth. "Careful. Accusation without rank is treason." Then listen as Blood Moon Blood speaks. Something flickered in his eyes at that. Not surprise. Calculation adjusting. A herald struck staff to stone. Tribunal convenes. All claims by moon witness. All verdicts binding. The main hall doors opened. Cordelia walked in between the two sentries and felt the weight of the kingdom turn toward her. The tribunal hall was wider than the circle outside, built for spectacle as much as justice. Moonstone tiles inset in dark granite, cedar smoke drifting from braziers along the walls. Elders sat elevated in their crescent. Pack leaders filled the lower benches. Warriors lined the aisles. At the far end, where no throne stood because Stoneheart kings judged on their feet, Wulfric waited in black wool and silver warbands, shoulders broad as the doorframe behind him, expression carved from restraint. He had removed his crown for tribunal as law required. He looked more dangerous without it. Cordelia stopped at the witness stone. Her pulse hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears, a drumbeat under the hall's low murmur. She forced her fingers to uncurl and set the linen bundle down. Charcoal rubbing, iron residue, shadow fang button. This was what she had. And what she had was enough, if truth still mattered here. Elder Myron's gaze traveled over her disheveled clothes with clinical distaste. You stand accused of false witness, custody breach, and incitement. Do you submit to moon oath? I do, Cordelia said. Myron lifted a ritual knife from the dais, hilt wrapped in white leather. Blood to stone confirms intent. Perjury brands the liar. Drake took one measured step forward. For process integrity, permit Shadowfang House to inspect the alleged evidence now. No, Cordelia said, sharper than she intended. It stays in open view. Mirren frowned. You do not direct this tribunal. A silence settled, tight, expectant. Cordelia's mind raced through every corridor she had survived, every bowed head she had offered to buy one more day. None of that would save her now. She had crossed the point where caution looked like guilt, and fear looked like consent. I am standing in the same palace that sold my labor, wearing the same scars they called discipline, with men who prospered on my silence asking whether my pain is admissible. My hands are shaking, and I hate that they can see it. I hate that part of me still wants to shrink small enough to avoid notice, still thinks survival means lowering my eyes. But the children in the chapel lofts are breathing because I ran. Matron Ilva believed me. The sentry believed enough to move. That is not nothing. I am done trading myself for delay. If truth costs blood, then blood. If they strip my name, I will speak it first. If they try to bind me under moon law, I will make them do it with witnesses, and their own faces turn toward me. I am afraid. I am here anyway. Mirren extended the knife. Cordelia took it. From the corner of her vision, she caught Wulfric shift his weight by half an inch, a predator's readiness hidden inside stillness. He had not spoken since she entered. He had watched everything. She drew the blade across her palm in one clean line. Blood welled instantly, bright and dark at once, then spilled over her lifeline and dropped to the moonstone slab at her feet. The world answered. A pulse rolled outward from the stone, silent but forceful, like deep water striking every wall at once. Braziers flared silver. Rune lines long dormant lit beneath the floor in branching arcs. Scent erupted through the hall, cedar smoke and first rain on hot dust, ancient and wild and unmistakable. Heads turned. Wolves in human skin went abruptly still. Even elders who despised her looked startled. Wulfric inhaled sharply. His eyes changed as everyone watched, amber flooding bright until molten light swallowed the brown, pupils narrowing to predatory slits. His canines lengthened. The aura that had always banked around him like banked fire slammed free, pressure dropping through the room so hard several courtiers staggered back. Warriors grabbed for control. A few younger wolves dropped instinctively to one knee. Cordelia swayed where she stood, heat pulsing beneath her skin so abruptly it made her gasp. Every nerve lit at once. A thrum built in her chest, urgent and terrifying, as if some locked chamber in her body had recognized a key before her mind could form the thought. Fear rose first, old and familiar, then longing, fierce enough to steal breath. The pull between them was not gentle, it was tidal. It was command and shelter and hunger and home, braided into one unbearable current. Drake hissed, "What did you do?" She barely heard him. Wulfric took one step off the king's mark, then another, gaze fixed on her as if nothing else in the hall existed. His voice, when it came, was roughened by control stretched thin. "Blood Moon," he said, like a vow and a wound. "All this time." Cordelia's hand trembled, blood still dripping onto moonstone runes now burning silver beneath her boots. "I didn't know," she whispered, and knew even as she said it that part of her had always known enough to run from this exact moment. He reached the edge of the witness ring and stopped, fingers curled hard at his sides, refusing even now to take what had not been offered. Then, in full view of council and pack, and the man trying to destroy her, Alpha King Wulfric's stone heart dropped to one knee. Gasps broke across the chamber. His head bowed once, not in submission to power, but in reverence so raw it cracked something tight behind her ribs. When he looked up again, that molten gaze locked to hers and held, the bond humming between them like drawn steel. "By Moonlaw and King's oath," he said, each word carrying to the farthest wall. "No one touches her without her consent. Not council, not crown, not me." The decree hit the hall like a dropped blade. No one moved for a breath, then sound returned in fragments. An elder's strangled protest, benches scraping stone, the sharp rustle of cloaks as wolves checked their instincts against rank. Elder Mirren rose halfway from her seat. "Your Grace, the oath pulse does not nullify procedure. She remains under accusation." Wulfric stood, but he did not step into Cordelia's space. He remained at the edge of the witness ring, golden light still burning through his irises, voice low enough to force silence from everyone straining to interrupt. "Procedure continues. Predation does not." He turned his head a fraction. "Captain Aaron, seal the evidence under royal lock. Send ward teams to the lower quarters, gatehouses, and crypt stairs. I want every child counted by name before the next bell." Drake spread his hands with practiced disbelief. "You are letting scent and spectacle overrule law." "I am enforcing law." Wulfric's gaze cut to him. "And I am warning you, Shadowfang, one more attempt to approach her without permission, and your house stands in contempt of crown protection." The warning was clinical. That made it more frightening. Cordelia's pulse still pounded from the bond strike, heat and panic, and a raw, aching pull she had no language for. Her cut palm dripped steadily onto moonstone. She became aware of the sting only when Wulfric looked down at her hand and then back to her face, waiting. "May I come closer?" he asked. The question, spoken in front of the entire court, disoriented her more than his aura had. Kings issued commands. He was asking. "Yes," she said, barely audible. He entered the ring slowly, as if approaching an injured wild thing he refused to startle. He removed a clean square of linen from inside his own sleeve and offered it rather than taking her hand. She pressed the cloth to her palm herself. He nodded once, acceptance without offense, then turned to the elders. "Tribunal is suspended until sunrise review," he said. "The witness remains under crown guard in neutral chambers, not council hold. Elder Myron, select 2 scribes not sworn to Shadowfang or Stoneheart branches. They will inventory evidence tonight. Matron Ilva is summoned as civilian witness. So are the sentries from the Cedar Gate." Drake's mouth tightened. "Convenient witnesses." "Breathing witnesses," Wulfric said. "A category your proposal lacked." A few people in the lower benches failed to hide brief, startled smiles. It was not humor exactly, but pressure releasing. Wulfric looked back at Cordelia. "Do you consent to relocation under my protection?" Every instinct she had sharpened over years of servitude told her to distrust easy shelter, to hear hidden cost beneath every offered kindness. Yet he had knelt instead of claimed. He had asked permission instead of using the bond as leverage. He had widened the witness list instead of narrowing it. She felt fear, still. She also felt something steadier taking shape beneath it. "I consent," she said. He signaled the captain, then stepped aside so she could leave the ring first. By the third moon bell, the palace had shifted from spectacle to siege discipline, corridors full of runners, guards rotating in pairs, kitchen fires banked low to keep smoke from masking scent trails. Cordelia was taken not to a dungeon room or ceremonial suite, but to an old map chamber near the king's private wing, thick-walled and windowed toward the inner court, with one door and two posted guards she recognized from the cedar grove. The message was plain: secure, visible, hard to tamper with. Inside, a fire burned steady in a deep hearth. A basin of hot water sat on the table beside clean cloths, a ceramic jar of salve, and a folded fur-lined cloak in stoneheart black. No chains, no ritual metal. Wulfric remained near the door, hands empty. "You can keep the guards or dismiss them," he said. "Your choice." "Keep them," she answered at once, then braced for the insult she expected to follow. He only nodded. Done. Silence spread, unfamiliar and tense. Cordelia sat on the edge of a cedar chest and unwound the blood-soaked linen from her palm. The cut had stopped bleeding but still throbbed. Her sleeves had slipped back in the run from custody. Thin iron bands sat above each wrist, nearly hidden in scar tissue and old leather ties, the last pieces of servant restraint she had never fully removed. Wulfric's focus dropped to them and held. He did not reach. "I did not know you still wore those." She laughed once, brittle. "Most people preferred not to know anything inconvenient about me." "I am not most people." The answer came without heat, and for some reason that made her throat tighten. She looked away, staring into the fire until sparks blurred. If this is performance, it is flawless. If this is strategy, it is patient enough to mimic reverence. I have lived too long inside other people's plans to mistake attention for safety. Yet he keeps putting choice back in my hands, even when the room would cheer him for taking it. I do not know what to do with a male who asks instead of seizes. I do not know where to place this pull in my chest that feels like terror and shelter at the same time. I do know my wrists hurt. I do know I am tired of bleeding in secret. "Can I remove them?" he asked quietly. Cordelia looked up. "Why would you?" "Because iron remembers," he said, "and because you should not have to." A long moment passed. She heard wind at the shutters, the crack of settling logs, her own breath unsteady in the warm room. Then she held out her left arm. "Only the ties," she said. "If it hurts, you stop." His expression shifted, not triumph, not relief exactly, but a grave kind of gratitude. "I stop if you say stop." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, large enough that the floor creaked under his weight, yet careful as a healer. His fingers were warm, calloused, and precise as he worked the old leather knot loose, then the second, then the rusted clasp beneath. He moved slowly enough that she could track every motion. When the first band came free, he set it on the table like evidence, not refuse. Then he paused and looked up for permission again. She offered her right wrist. This one had scarred tighter. The metal had sunk into ridged skin over years, and when he eased it away, she hissed despite herself. He stopped instantly, hands retreating. "Keep going," she whispered. He finished the clasp and lifted the iron clear. For the first time since adolescence, both her wrists were bare. Pale rings of damaged skin circled them, ugly and undeniable. Wulfric stared at the marks, jaw flexing once, fury banked under discipline. He warmed salve between his palms until it softened, then waited. "May I?" Cordelia nodded. He touched her carefully, spreading the salve over scar tissue with an almost ritual focus, thumbs feather light where nerves were raw. No grabbing, no claiming pressure. Just patient care, as if he believed healing itself was a form of oath. When he finished one wrist, he wrapped it with fresh linen, then the other. Only then did he speak, voice roughened by restrained anger that was not directed at her. "No chain touches you again while I breathe." The words landed deeper than she expected, settling into places inside her that had gone numb years ago. He rose, took the folded cloak, and draped it over her shoulders without fastening it, giving her room to shrug free if she wanted. The fur trapped hearth warmth instantly. It smelled like cedar and cold night air and the same first rain note that had exploded from the moonstone. "There is a bed in the alcove," he said. "I will stay at the threshold until dawn. Door open or closed is your call." "You are the king," she said. "You don't sleep on thresholds." "Tonight I do." She stared at him, searching for mockery, pride, calculation, anything she could categorize. She found none. He moved to the doorway, sat with his back to the jamb, and laid his sword across his knees, facing outward toward the corridor. Cordelia lay down fully clothed atop the coverlet and watched him through half-lowered lashes until exhaustion dragged her under. Each time she woke in brief, ragged bursts, he was still there, a dark, immovable line between her and the rest of the palace. By first light, summons bells called the Emergency Council Assembly, and the map chamber filled with morning cold when the guards opened the door. Wulfric stood before anyone entered, as if he had not slept at all. He did not touch her. He offered his hand anyway. She hesitated, then set her fingers in his. The council great room smelled of ink, wet wool, and impatience. News had spread through every level of the keep before sunrise. The oath pulse, the blood moon scent, the king kneeling. Benches were packed, not with curiosity now, but with sharpened agendas. Cordelia felt eyes tracking the bandages at her wrists, the king's cloak around her shoulders, the space Wulfric kept deliberately half a step behind her as they approached the central floor. Mirren called order. Scribes read overnight reports. 2 crypt corridors sealed. 1 illegal transfer ledger recovered. 3 lower quarter children found hidden in an abandoned grain annex and returned alive to their families. Cordelia closed her eyes for one heartbeat at that. Relief, almost painful. Then Elder Garrick rose, voice heavy with false pragmatism. "Given newly asserted lineage and potential succession implications, protocol requires immediate fertility examination by council healers to establish viability for Luna status and prevent future dispute." The words struck like ice water. The room rustled with assent from too many corners. Cordelia went still. Old training screamed at her to submit, endure, dissociate. She felt the beginnings of that familiar internal retreat, the one that turned her body into territory others could debate. Wulfric stepped forward so quickly his chair tipped behind him. He placed himself between Cordelia and the elder crescent, broad back a wall of black wool and steel. When he spoke, his voice had gone glacial. "Sovereign Law, Article 9, he said. "No body under Crown protection is subject to inspection, ritual, or handling without explicit consent, spoken freely and witnessed. This includes prospective Luna, reigning Luna, and civilian claimant." Garrick scoffed. "Article 9 was drafted for war captives." "It was drafted," Wulfric said, "because men like you called coercion administrative necessity." Silence snapped through the room. Myron tried to recover control. "Your Grace, no one is proposing harm." You proposed access, he replied. Access denied. A healer in council gray rose from the side bench. Then we cannot verify her worth. Cordelia felt the insult like a slap she had expected and still hated. Before she could answer, Wulfric turned his head slightly, enough that she could see the hard line of his profile. She does not owe this room proof of worth, he said. She has already provided proof of courage, evidence under threat, and testimony that produced live recoveries before sunrise. If any voice here calls her manipulative, impure, or unfit while standing behind procedure, speak now and stand by it. Whispers started anyway. A councilwoman near the rear muttered, not quietly enough. She trapped him with blood theater. Wulfric faced the benches fully. His aura rolled out, controlled but vast. The pressure of an apex wolf choosing not to tear and making everyone aware of the choice. Those who accuse may proceed under dominance right. Step onto the challenge mark and repeat the charge to my face. Or retract publicly. No one moved. The councilwoman lowered her gaze first. I retract. Another elder cleared his throat. Retracted. One by one, each accuser bowed their head or spoke the words, some through clenched teeth, some with visible relief at being given an exit. The room transformed in increments, contempt folding into wary respect, then into a silence that finally made space for Cordelia as a person rather than a rumor. Wulfric waited until the last retraction was recorded, then stepped aside enough for her to be seen. He did not keep her hidden once the threat had passed. Cordelia Bloodmoon, he said, voice carrying to the scribes, state your will for the record. No one speaks it for you. She felt every gaze in the room, and for the first time it did not feel like being pinned, it felt like standing. She drew a steadying breath. My will is simple, she said. Find every missing child. Try every conspirator in open court. No inspections. No forced rites. No decisions about my body without me. Mirren looked to Wulfric, then to the watching benches, and understood where the balance had shifted. So entered, she said. As the assembly broke into task orders and dispatch calls, Cordelia remained where she was, strangely unmoored by the absence of expected harm. Wulfric turned toward her, asking with his eyes before he moved closer. She surprised herself by closing the remaining distance first. When she spoke, only he could hear. You keep standing in front of me. If you want me beside you instead, I will. She studied his face. The fatigue there, the restraint, the patience that had outlasted 5 public refusals and 1 night of provocation. The guard she had worn like armor did not vanish, but a seam opened in it, narrow and real. Beside me, she said, and did not let go of his hand when they walked back to the center table together. They reached the center table as Captain Aaron slid 3 wax-sealed packets across the oak, each tagged with crypt inventory marks and the hour of seizure. Snowmelt dripped from her cloak hem onto the stone floor, and there was ash on one sleeve, as if she had come straight from a burned ledger room. Recovered from the North Archive Annex and the old ritual stores, Aaron said. 2 stewards attempted to leave through the mill gate carrying these. One wore Shadowfang livery under a porter's coat. Both are in holding. Mirren gestured for the nearest scribe. Break seals. The first packet held transfer ledgers, neat columns of names stripped to initials, ages, and coded destinations. C for seller intake, V for vault hold, R for returned. 3 names were marked with the symbol Cordelia recognized from the brand rubbing she had presented. Hooked crescent, 3 bars. The second packet held succession rolls, older parchment scraped and overwritten, where airlines should have been fixed. The final packet was smallest, tied in black thread. Inside lay 2 things: a child service contract bearing Cordelia's own name at 13, sold to palace labor by guardian authority, and a thin chain with her mother's moon lily crest bent nearly flat, as if someone had stepped on it and kept it anyway. The room narrowed to the paper in front of her. Drake's voice carried from the opposite side of the table, controlled and offended. Planted for theater. Anyone can imitate household script. Aaron did not look at him. Then perhaps anyone also imitates your steward's fingerprint in blood wax. We found it on all 3 packets. A murmur moved through the assembly benches like dry grass catching flame. Wulfric angled his body slightly toward Cordelia, not touching, shielding her from the line of Drake's stare. "Read the contract aloud," he said. The scribe swallowed and obeyed. By consent of appointed family guardian, the girl Cordelia Bloodmoon is remanded to domestic service for debt balancing and conduct correction. Term indefinite, status collateral. Signed, Drake Shadowfang. Silence cracked. Cordelia heard herself ask, very calmly, "Where did he get guardian authority if my mother was alive then?" No one answered immediately. Then Mirren lifted another sheet from the succession roll packet, fingertips suddenly less steady. "There is an attached death declaration for Lady Selene Bloodmoon, dated 2 days earlier. Cause listed as fever seizure." Matron Ilva stepped forward from the civilian rail, voice hoarse. "I washed fever dead for 11 winters. Fever leaves a pattern in skin and breath. Selene did not die of fever. She came to the lower infirmary with bruising at the throat and a cracked hyoid." The elder Crescent erupted at once, denials and legal objections tangling into noise. Drake raised his hand for silence as if he still expected the room to obey him. "My aunt was unstable," he said. "She attacked a guard in delirium. Tragic, yes, but not murder. As for the girl, I placed her in service to keep her alive when rival houses circled our line. Everything I did preserved the pack." Cordelia turned toward him fully. "You sold me. I protected you from succession knives. You branded me collateral. You were not strong enough to carry your name." The words struck with the force of remembered corridors, locked pantry doors, and years spent learning to become unnoticed on command. Wulfric's hand tightened on the table edge until wood creaked, yet he kept his voice level when he spoke. "Drake Shadowfang, you are confined pending murder and trafficking charges. Captain Aaron, strip his house of internal guard authority and seize ritual inventory under Crown Seal." Drake smiled then, small and almost pitying, as if they had all arrived exactly where he wanted them. "Confine me if you like. You are already standing inside my timing." By late afternoon, every hall in Stoneheart Keep carried that sentence in a different form, and panic grew teeth. Cordelia sat in the map chamber again while scribes copied evidence under paired guard, the king's cloak still around her shoulders, and the bandages at her wrists, freshly changed. Wulfric stood at the long map table opposite her, palms braced on cedar, reading the stolen ledgers with the intensity of a commander plotting siege lines. Outside the narrow windows, the sky had gone flat pewter, snow threatening without yet falling. Aaron entered without ceremony and placed a 4th packet down between them. "Intercepted from a courier trying to leave for the western border. Addressed to 3 council houses and 1 foreign broker. Seal appears royal." Wulfric's expression hardened. "I did not send couriers." The seal broke under his thumb. He read the first page, then the second, and handed them to Cordelia without commentary. The letters were written in a hand close enough to his to sting. They spoke of strategic pairing, of securing blood moon reproductive capacity through public pressure, of delaying open claim until rival houses were compromised. One line used her name as if it were livestock inventory. Cordelia read that line twice before she could force her eyes lower. Heat surged up her throat, then drained out, leaving cold precision behind. Drake had not only forged a case against her, he had forged doubt where she had only just begun to place trust. She set the papers down carefully. "If these circulate, every protection you gave me this morning looks staged." "Yes," Wulfric said. "No defense. No offended outrage. That is the point. He moved around the table and stopped a measured distance away. Look at the dates. She did. All four were stamped 3 years ago, on nights she had publicly declined him. On those dates, Wulfric said, I was at border war camps. There are garrison logs and 200 witnesses who would enjoy proving me elsewhere. The syntax is close to mine because the forger had access to court directives. The intent is not to convince me, it is to isolate you. Cordelia held his gaze, searching for the hidden edge she had been trained to expect. She found fatigue, anger tightly leashed, and a kind of stark honesty that did not ask to be praised. I want to believe him because my body remembers the way he asked permission with everyone watching. I want to distrust him because distrust kept me alive when family did not. Both truths live in me at once, and they scrape against each other until I can barely think. If I lean toward him, I risk being wrong in the oldest way. If I step back now, I hand Drake the exact fracture he designed. I am tired of choosing between danger and loneliness as if those are the only doors. I am done being maneuvered by fear that wears other people's signatures. I will not surrender judgment. I will not surrender desire either. I can stand in uncertainty and still choose. She exhaled slowly. Then we answer in public before he can cede private whispers. Wulfric nodded once. Agreed. Erin cleared her throat. There is more. Interrogation of the steward confirms a ritual requisition filed under Emergency Sovereignty Clause. It authorizes chain ring installation beneath the sacred circle before tonight's assembly. Who signed it? Cordelia asked. Erin's jaw tightened. Countersigned by Elder Garrick and Drake, with a copied royal sigil. Wulfric's gaze went feral for one dangerous heartbeat, then steadied. Lock the circle. Double guards at every Undercroft entrance. No one enters ritual sublevels without my direct order. Erin hesitated. There is pushback from council traditionalists. They are calling for immediate mate ceremony to stabilize line succession. Cordelia gave a short, sharp laugh that held no amusement. Stability. Their favorite word for control. Pressure mounted by the hour. Petitioners crowded outer halls, some begging for missing kin to be found, others demanding ritual certainty to quiet markets and border scouts. 3 elders formally requested that Cordelia voluntarily complete the mate rite before dusk to prevent civil fracture. 2 sent healers with incense and compliance scripts she sent away unopened. Every corridor seemed to contain a new opinion about her body and the crown. Wulfric refused each request in writing, then in person, then with soldiers posted at doors. At the 7th bell, Mirren arrived in the map chamber flanked by 2 scribes and no escort, a deliberate signal that she came as law, not faction. She looked older than she had that morning. We recovered hidden etchings under the tribunal floor, she said without preamble. Command sigils keyed to Blood Moon blood and King signature resonance. If activated during a mate rite, they would siphon bond energy into a 3rd anchor. Cordelia felt the room tilt slightly. A theft lattice. Myron gave a curt nod. Forbidden since the Red Schism. 3rd anchor being Drake, Wulfric said. Likely. We found a focus collar in ritual storage sized for wolf form, inscribed with claim override. A cold, exact anger settled in Cordelia's chest. Drake had planned this for years, and he had planned it close enough to the law that it could be mistaken for ceremony until the trap closed. Mirren's gaze shifted to Cordelia. He also filed sealed notice challenging your blood legitimacy at moonrise. If you refuse public response, custom allows provisional detention until adjudication. There it was, the corridor narrowing again. Cordelia stood. Then I answer publicly. On my feet. Wulfric's voice dropped. Not tonight. We regroup in the mountain keep, bring allied alphas, and return with full war council. He wants me hidden, she said. Absence lets him narrate guilt. It keeps you alive. It keeps me silent. They stared at each other across the map table, both right in different directions. and the tension between protection and agency pulled tight enough to hum. Myron broke in quietly. Decision window is short. Moonrise challenge call begins in 1 hour. A runner slammed into the doorframe, breathless, snow in his hair. Captain Aaron sent me. North holding breached. Drake Shadowfang is gone. Everything accelerated. Wulfric was already moving, issuing orders in clipped bursts that sent guards sprinting down intersecting corridors, lock inner gates, seal armory access. Recall crypt teams. Cordelia followed him into the passage despite 3 separate commands to remain in chamber lock, because remaining behind while Drake moved through her home in the dark felt too much like old captivity wearing new paint. By full dark, Stormwind had started in earnest, funneling through the open courts and making torchlight gutter sideways. The keep's bell pattern changed from custody breach to hostile internal threat. Wolves shifted in side yards for scent tracking. Human guards held choke points with spears and iron nets. At the west transept, they found the first body. Not dead, but unconscious. Temple bruised. Keys missing. At the crypt stair, 2 more guards were down with the same blunt force strike, clean and efficient. Drake had not come to butcher. He had come to reach a location. The circle sublevel, Cordelia said. Wulfric signaled his strike unit forward. With me. They descended a spiral of wet stone into the undercroft chambers beneath the sacred circle, where old runoff channels cut through moonrock and ritual acoustics carried every footfall too far. The air smelled of iron filings and singed cedar. Ahead, chain clatter echoed once, then stopped. When they burst into the final vault, the room was empty except for carved anchor posts, a rack of missing ritual rings, and 1 lantern swinging slowly from a ceiling hook. On the floor lay a fresh line of chalk salt sigils, leading to a drainage tunnel large enough for a wolf to pass. Aaron knelt, touched the chalk, and looked up. Still warm. A second runner appeared at the vault entrance, chest heaving. Message from Upper Court. Drake took Elder Garrick and 6 council loyalists to the sacred circle. He invoked emergency moon challenge under Bloodline Dispute Statute. He is demanding Cordelia's appearance now, or he begins judgment in absentia and triggers provisional binding. Wulfric swore under his breath, low and lethal. He cannot trigger binding without royal consent. The runner swallowed. He is using your forged signet and the old moonstone amplifiers. The first ring is already active. Somewhere above them, through layers of stone, a deep vibration rolled across the keep like distant thunder. Not weather, magic engaging. Cordelia felt it in her bandaged wrists, in the cut line on her palm, in the marrow-deep pull of the bond that had not yet been sealed and was now being weaponized as leverage. She met Wulfric's gaze and saw the same recognition land in him at the same moment. Drake had stopped running. Drake had begun the ritual, and the sacred circle was calling her name through the stone. Cordelia seized Wulfric's forearm, forcing him to meet her eyes in the dim vault light, while guards crowded the passage behind them. If I do not answer that call in person, he binds an empty place and writes my silence as guilt, she said. I am done letting him narrate me. Wulfric's jaw hardened. He built this trap around your blood. Then my blood closes it. For 1 suspended beat, command and fear warred across his face. Then he gave 1 sharp nod, the decision landing like a blade set point down. Strike unit with me. Aaron, split your line. Half through west stair, half around the upper terrace. No one touches Cordelia unless she calls for it. They ran. The climb from undercroft to open air came in brutal bursts of slick steps and torch smoke. By the time they broke into the upper court, Stormwind had turned vicious, hurling sleet sideways through the colonnades. Bells hammered overhead. Wolves in partial shift held formation at every arch. Courtiers and quarter families packed the approach to the sacred circle, forced back by guard spears and fear. The stone ring blazed at the center of the clearing, old runes burning an unhealthy green-white instead of moon-silver. Chains rose from slots cut between the monoliths, 6 lengths of blackened iron humming with stolen charge. At the far side stood Drake Shadowfang in torn ceremonial black, forged signet bright on his hand, a ritual focus collar at his throat engraved with override sigils. Elder Garrick and 3 loyalists knelt beside the altar, wrists bound in chain loops that linked to the active lattice. Drake lifted both arms as Cordelia and Wulfric entered the perimeter. His voice rolled across the clearing with amplified force, shaped by moonstone channels beneath their feet. Witnesses of Stoneheart Keep, behold the claimant who hid her blood, corrupted tribunal, and seduced a king into abandoning law. Under emergency statute, I invoke provisional binding until legitimacy is resolved. A whip-crack of power snapped through the circle. 2 chains shot toward Cordelia, striking like striking serpents. One wrapped her left wrist over fresh bandage. The second caught her upper arm and yanked hard enough to drag her to one knee on frozen stone. Pain flared along old scar tissue, a white line of agony that made her vision spark. Wulfric lunged. 3 Shadowfang loyalists shifted mid-leap and hit him from the flank. He met them head-on, a blur of black wool and claws and controlled violence, driving one aside with a shoulder strike, wrenching another down by the collar, roaring an order that split the crowd into motion. Then everything fractured into battle. Stoneheart guards crashed into Shadowfang holdouts along the ring's edge. Wolves slammed together in snarling knots of fur and muscle. Elders shouted for order no one could hear. Sleet hissed on hot rune lines and turned to steam. Cordelia tried to rise, and the chain bit tighter, iron grinding against the place where servant metal had once lived under her skin. Drake watched her struggle with naked satisfaction. There you are, kneeling where you belong. He flicked his hand. The chain tightened again, hauling her another foot toward the altar. Wind tore her hood free. Her hair whipped across her face, copper and ash and sleet on her tongue, the whole clearing tilting around one brutal fact. He had engineered years of humiliation for this exact posture. I am on my knees, and every old lesson is screaming now. Stay quiet. Make yourself small. Endure until it passes. That strategy kept me breathing, but it also kept me available, movable, useful to men who called exploitation duty. I feel the chain pulling at scars he wrote into my life, and I understand the architecture of it all at once. 5 refusals were not cowardice, they were triage. Tonight, triage is over. I can feel the bond with Wulfric like a live wire at the edge of thought. Not a command, but an offered bridge. If I cross it, I cannot pretend this is only survival anymore. It becomes choice, and choice has a cost. Good. Let it cost. I choose a world where girls from the lower quarters are not inventory, where law cannot be forged by whoever shouts first, where my name is spoken by me. I rise now, or I disappear forever. Cordelia planted her free hand flat to the runed stone and pushed herself upright against the drag of chain. Her voice came raw at first, then sharpened until even the outer crowd turned toward her. My name is Cordelia Bloodmoon, daughter of Selene Bloodmoon, she said. I refused the mate right for 5 years because Shadowfang influence had already entered this palace, and I would not give traffickers access to a crown bond they could hijack. Drake laughed. Convenient courage, discovered at the edge of defeat. She ignored him and faced the witnesses. Look at his ledger marks. Look at the children returned branded. Look at the forged transfer order that moved chains from crypt to circle. This ritual was never about law. It is theft dressed in tradition. A ripple moved through the benches. Matron Ilva stepped to the front rail and shouted, I witnessed the contracts. I witnessed the marks. Captain Aaron's voice cut through next. And I witnessed the counterfeit sigil. Drake snarled and drove his palm into the altar sigil. The lattice flared. All 6 chains rose, then plunged toward Cordelia at once. She did not retreat. She ripped the old linen from her wrists with her teeth and pressed both scarred bands to the moonstone channel carved at her feet. Blood from her half-healed palm smeared the groove. For a single terrifying second, nothing happened. Then silver ignited under her skin. Runes unfurled from each servant scar in thin, luminous lines, climbing her forearms like living script. The chain around her wrist shuddered, black metal screaming as command direction reversed. One by one, the links tore free from Drake's sigils and slammed into new anchors that formed around Cordelia's heartbeat, each pulse locking the lattice to her instead of him. The clearing went silent with shock. Cordelia gasped as power flooded through her, vast and cold and clean, not fire, but moontide. She reached for Wulfric across the chaos with deliberate intent, opening the bond channel rather than falling into it. The mind link snapped into place in a rush of sensation. His battle focus, her rune map, shared coordinates overlaying the circle. Left post unstable, she sent. His collar ring is the regulator. Break that, and the siphon dies. Understood? Came back, fierce and steady. On your signal. Drake's composure cracked. No, no, you do not command Blood Moon inheritance. You are collateral. Cordelia lifted her blood-slick palm and drew the power inward. Silver condensed along her hand and lengthened into a narrow crescent blade, translucent as ice and bright as forged moonlight. A blood-forged moonblade. The crowd recoiled as she took one step forward, then another, chains orbiting her like tamed lightning. Collateral does not rewrite your lattice, she said. Within minutes, the battle tightened to the inner ring. Stoneheart wolves drove the last Shadowfang loyalists back toward the cedar line. Wulfric broke free from the melee and charged the altar from Drake's blind side. Drake answered with a roar and shifted, bones cracking through the storm noise as his body surged into a massive black wolf. Collar ring still locked at his neck, amber eyes gone feral with panic and rage. He launched straight for Cordelia's throat. She pivoted into the lunge instead of away, dropping her center of gravity and bringing the moonblade up in a clean two-handed arc. The blade punched through thick shoulder muscle and pinned Drake to the altar edge, stone ringing with the impact. He thrashed, jaws snapping inches from her face, breath hot with iron and sleet. Wulfric hit him from the flank in half-shift, claws driving into the collar mount. Metal shrieked. With one brutal wrench, Wulfric tore the focus ring free and hurled it across the circle, where it shattered against a standing stone in a burst of dead sparks. The siphon collapsed. All remaining chains fell inert. Drake dropped back into human form, pinned and shaking, black blood from the shoulder wound soaking his torn collar but no longer feeding magic. He spat at Cordelia's boots, eyes blazing with hatred. You were born to kneel, he rasped. Cordelia stepped closer, moonblade steady at his chest. I was born to end you. She lifted her voice for the whole pack. I invoke trial by moon verdict. Crimes named: murder of Selene Bloodmoon, trafficking of lower quarter children, forged succession records, counterfeit royal decrees, and ritual treason against crown and pack. Moonlight struck the altar stone. Silver fire ran across Drake's skin in branching marks, branding guilt signatures visible to every witness. He screamed once, more fury than pain. Wulfric stood beside Cordelia, chest heaving, gaze lethal but controlled. Confess, he said. Name your co-conspirators and submit sentence. Last chance. Drake laughed through blood. I would rather burn the keep than yield it to a servant. He lunged anyway, ripping himself halfway off the blade to reach for Cordelia's throat with clawed fingers. She moved first, one precise thrust, moonblade through the heart. Drake froze, breath catching in a small stunned sound, then went slack against the altar. The silver fire flared once and extinguished. Storm wind tore across the circle, carrying away the last of the corrupted charge. No one spoke for several beats. Then Mirren's voice, shaking but audible, cut through the aftermath. Recorded before moon and witnesses, Drake Shadowfang found guilty by trial verdict and slain under lawful challenge. Cordelia stood over him, trembling from exertion and power drain, blade fading back into blood and light along her palm. Around the circle, wolves and elders and lower quarter families bowed their heads, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. Wulfric turned toward her, waiting for permission even now, and when she gave the smallest nod, he came to her side and took her hand while the pack watched the old order end. His grip was steady, warm and careful around the torn skin at her palm. Snowmelt and sleet ran in thin streams through the runes at their feet, washing Drake's blood toward the outer drain channels where corrupted sigils had already gone dark. "Cordelia," Wulfric said, voice low enough that only she and the nearest witnesses could hear. "Do you want this done here, before them all, or in the king's chamber with only chosen witnesses?" Her whole body shook with spent power. The bond between them hummed, half-sealed and bright, tugging at every breath. For 5 years she had endured spectacle as punishment. She would not hide her choice now. "Here," she said, "no more shadows." Mirren stepped forward, staff grounded, face pale but composed. "By moon law, mutual claiming requires spoken consent and witness. State your will." Cordelia lifted her chin, meeting not the elders first but the lower quarter families crowded at the rail. Matron Ilva with one arm around the scullion boy who had carried her warning, Captain Aaron streaked with snow and battle soot, guards from the cedar grove standing bloodied and unbowed. "I give consent freely," she said. "No coercion, no debt, no command." Wulfric's gaze never left hers. "I receive and return consent freely. No coercion, no debt, no command." She stepped into him first. It felt like crossing a border she had defended too long to remember what peace looked like. Her fingers found the line of his jaw, rough with cold and battle grit, and she tilted her throat in clear offering. The clearing went silent down to the scrape of wind over stone. Wulfric framed her face in both hands. "Never caged, never owned, always chosen," he murmured, and then his mouth brushed the place where neck met shoulder, a reverent pause before his canines sank in. Pain came bright and immediate, a sharp strike that pulled a sound from her she did not recognize. Then the pain opened. Heat poured through it, not consuming but flooding, racing from the bite through her chest, down her spine, out to the raw ends of her fingers. Gold and silver light burst at the edge of her vision, threads whipping from his sternum to hers, knotting, tightening, settling. The storm noise dimmed. She felt his pulse against her skin, then inside her awareness, a second rhythm aligning with her own. "Mine." His mind breathed through the bond, not as possession but as vow. "Yours," she answered before fear could translate it into anything smaller. "Mate," they both said, the word a shared exhale against marked skin. He released her with controlled care and pressed his forehead to hers, while the clay mark sealed in a band of molten warmth that gradually softened to a steady throb. The bond remained open, waiting, incomplete, until she chose the second half. Cordelia slid her hand to the back of his neck and drew him down. Shock flickered through the nearest ranks when they realized what she intended. No Luna had returned a king's mark in living memory. She saw it in Mirren's widened eyes, in Garrick's surviving loyalists going rigid, in Matron Ilva's fierce, wet smile. "Look at me," Cordelia whispered. Wulfric obeyed instantly. Something ancient looked out through his eyes, fierce and vulnerable at once. She bared her teeth and bit into his mark point, just above the junction of shoulder and throat, hard enough to break skin and taste iron-rich warmth. He shuddered, a rough sound torn from deep in his chest, one hand fisting in her cloak, while the other held her waist as if the world had narrowed to this single exchange. Pain flashed through her jaw and then transformed, turning into a deep, resonant pull that snapped the last distance closed. The bond completed like two rivers meeting. Memory and emotion flooded both directions in a controlled surge. His 5 years of waiting at the stone circle without forcing her hand, each refusal accepted as her right. Her years in service corridors counting exits, hiding cuffs under sleeves, choosing public shame to keep predators from crown magic. His rage when he saw the scar bands. Her terror in the antechamber, and the cold certainty that made her climb through stone anyway. Nothing erased, nothing edited, witnessed, held. Mine, she sent this time with full strength. Yours, he answered, and the word carried gratitude that shook her harder than the bite. Mate, they sealed together, breath mingling in winter air. Golden and silver threads flared around them in a visible helix before sinking beneath skin. The pressure in the clearing changed as their synchronized heartbeats settled into one shared cadence. Wolves along the perimeter lowered their heads. Some knelt outright. Not to him alone, to both. When she swayed, he caught her and wrapped his cloak fully around her shoulders, drawing her against his chest without restricting her movement. She felt the bond now as a warm, continuous line under everything else, not a leash, not a cage, but an open channel where his steadiness met her will and amplified it. By dawn, the sacred circle had been scrubbed, re-sanctified, and ringed with witness braziers for emergency court. Cordelia sat at the high table beside Wulfric, claim marks visible by choice, while scribes read every item into public record one by one. The charcoal rubbing, iron residue, and Shadowfang button were verified by two independent smiths as matching fresh brand stock from seized Shadowfang forges. The transfer ledgers were decoded and matched to names, then posted in the hall for families to review in person. The rewritten succession rolls were restored from archive underlayers and confirmed by Moonstone imprint. The child service contract bearing Drake's signature was entered as proof of unlawful sale. Selene Bloodmoon's bent moon lily crest, recovered from the black thread packet, was cleaned and returned to Cordelia's hands in open court. She fastened it at her throat before the entire assembly. Captain Aaron reported final recovery outcomes aloud. All missing lower quarter children accounted for, examined by volunteer healers chosen by their own families, and reunited under guard escort. She submitted gate reports, crypt seizure lists, and the shattered focus collar fragments. The forged royal letters were compared against garrison logs from the same dates and declared counterfeit beyond dispute. Guards who had exchanged that loaded silence outside Cordelia's hold were called. One admitted he had seen the ritual rings moved and feared speaking. The other confirmed he never delivered the false transfer order because the king had signed nothing unseen. Myron entered both statements without reduction. Garrick confessed countersigning the emergency requisition under Drake's pressure and was stripped of elder chain pending sentence. The two stewards caught at the mill gate named Byers and Roots. Those routes were raided before sunset. No one vanished into private punishment. Every verdict was spoken under moon witness. 3 nights later, in the great room where she had once been asked to prove her worth, Cordelia stood on the coronation mark in dark silver and black, wrists bare except for healing salve sheen, Celine's crest at her throat and Wulfric at her left shoulder, half a step back by his own insistence while Mirren placed the high lunar circlet on Cordelia's head. The hall answered with a unified bow. "Speak your first decree," Mirren said. Cordelia looked to Matron Ilva, to Aaron, to the lower quarter mothers and fathers now seated in the front ranks by law, not favor. "Shadowfang assets are seized and transferred to survivor restitution," she said. "Compensation ledgers open at first light. The old servant quarters are dissolved and rebuilt as Moonlily House, a sanctuary school for orphaned girls and branded survivors with trade tutors, legal advocates, and self-defense training under Crown stipend. No labor contracts for minors. Ever. Wulfric touched fist to heart. By Crown, enacted. On the first winter moon after the coronation, beneath clear sky and unbroken bells, they returned to the sacred stone circle for the ceremony she had declined 5 times. This time, there was no coercive script, no hidden chain slots, no council trap waiting under polished law. Only 2 vows spoken face to face, renewed by mutual choice, while children from Moonlily House scattered cedar needles and laughed when the wind stole half the words. 1 year later, moonlight silvered the terrace above Stoneheart Keep. Cordelia stood wrapped in fur with their newborn daughter asleep against her chest, tiny fingers curled around the edge of Celene's restored crest now pinned to Cordelia's cloak. Wulfric stood beside her with one hand at her back and the other shielding the infant from the night breeze, his deference to Cordelia no longer surprising anyone because it had become the kingdom's everyday shape of power. Below, pack families filled the courtyard for evening meal, voices carrying upward in warm waves. When they looked toward the terrace, they did not whisper pity. They spoke her name with reverence, then spoke their daughter's name with joy, and the sound rose clean into the winter stars.